The Kingdom of Aksum, also known as the Kingdom of Aksum or the Aksumite Empire, was an ancient Habesha kingdom that controlled what are now Eritrea, northern Ethiopia, parts of eastern Sudan and southern Yemen at its peak. It was centralized in northern Ethiopia, and its capital was Aksum or Aksum. Aksumite rulers styled themselves as King of Kings, King of Aksum, Himyar, Radon, Saba, Salhan, Shiamo, Beja and of Kush. Ruled by the Aksumites, it existed from approximately 80 BC to AD 825. The polity was centered in the city of Aksum and grew from the Proto-Aksumite Iron Age period around the 4th century BC to achieve prominence by the 1st century AD. Aksum became a major player on the commercial route between the Roman Empire and ancient India. The Aksumite rulers facilitated trade by minting their own Aksumite currency, with the state establishing its hegemony over the declining kingdom of Kush. It also regularly entered the politics of the kingdoms on the Arabian Peninsula and eventually extended its rule over the region with the conquest of the Himyarite kingdom. The Manichaei prophet Mani regarded Aksum as one of the 4 great powers of his time, the others being Persia, Rome, and China. It ruled the South Arabia of Yemen for half a century in the 6th century. The Aksumites erected monumental stelae, which served a religious purpose in pre-Christian times. One of these granite columns is the largest such structure in the world, at 90 feet. Under Ezana, Aksum adopted Christianity. The kingdom's ancient capital, also called Aksum, is now a town in Tigray region. The kingdom used the name Ethiopia as early as the 4th century. Tradition claims Aksum as the alleged resting place of the Ark of the Covenant and the purported home of the Queen of Sheba. Historical records. Aksum is mentioned in the 1st century AD Periplus of the Erythraean Sea as an important marketplace for the trade in ivory, which was exported throughout the ancient world. It states that the ruler of Aksum in the 1st century was Zoskales, who, besides ruling the kingdom, likewise controlled land near the Red Sea, Adulis and lands through the highlands of present-day Eritrea. He is also said to have been familiar with Greek literature. 4. Below Ptolemaeus of the Hunts, at a distance of about 3,000 stadia, there is Adulis, a port established by law, lying at the inner end of a bay that runs in toward the south. Before the harbor lies the so-called Mountain Island, about 200 stadia seaward from the very head of the bay, with the shores of the mainland close to it on both sides. Ships bound for this port now anchor here because of attacks from the land. They used formerly to anchor at the very head of the bay, by an island called Diodorus, close to the shore, which could be reached on foot from the land, by which means the barbarous natives attacked the island. Opposite Mountain Island, on the mainland 20 stadia from shore, lies Adulis, a fair-sized village, from which there is a 3 days' journey to Kaloe, an inland town and the first market for ivory. From that place to the city of the people called Aksumites there is a 5 days' journey more. To that place all the ivory is brought from the country beyond the Nile through the district called Cyaneum, and thence to Adulis. Practically the whole number of elephants and rhinoceros that are killed live in the places inland, although at rare intervals they are hunted on the seacoast even near Adulis. Before the harbor of that market town, out at sea on the right hand, there lie a great many little sandy islands called Alalii, yielding tortoiseshell, which is brought to market there by the fish-eaters. 6. There are imported into these places, undressed cloth made in Egypt for the Berbers, robes from Arsinoe, cloaks of poor quality dyed in colors, double-fringed linen mantles, many articles of flint glass, and others of murrhine, made in Diospolis, and brass, which is used for ornament and in cut pieces instead of coin, sheets of soft copper, used for cooking utensils and cut up for bracelets and anklets for the women, iron, which is made into spears used against the elephants and other wild beasts, and in their wars. Besides these, small axes are imported, and adzes and swords, copper drinking cups, round and large, a little coin for those coming to the market, wine of Laodicea and Italy, not much, olive oil, not much, for the king, gold and silver plate made after the fashion of the country, and for clothing, military cloaks, and thin coats of skin, of no great value. Likewise from the district of Arica across this sea, there are imported Indian iron, and steel, and Indian cotton cloth, the broadcloth called monake and that called sagmatogene, and girdles, and coats of skin and mallow-colored cloth, and a few muslins, and colored lac. There are exported from these places ivory, and tortoise shell and rhinoceros horn. The most from Egypt is brought to this market from the month of January to September, that is, from Tybe to Thoth, but seasonably they put to sea about the month of September. History. Origins. Largely on the basis of Carlo Conti Rossini's theories and prolific work on Ethiopian history, Aksum was previously thought to have been founded by the Sabaeans, who spoke a language from the Semitic branch of the Afro-Asiatic language family. Evidence suggests that Semitic-speaking Aksumites Semiticized the Agal people, who originally spoke other Afro-Asiatic languages from the family's Cushitic branch, and had already established an independent civilization in the territory before the arrival of the Sabaeans. Scholars like Stuart Munro Hay thus point to the existence of an older kingdom known as DMT, which flourished in the area between the 10th and 5th centuries BC, prior to the proposed Sabaean migration in the 4th or 5th century BC. They also cite evidence indicating that Sabaean settlers resided in the region for little more than a few decades. Sabaean influence is now thought to have been minor, limited to a few localities, and disappearing after a few decades or a century, perhaps representing a trading or military colony in some sort of symbiosis or military alliance with the civilization of Mount or some Proto-Aksumite state. As George Hatka put it, the most significant and lasting impact of these colonists was the establishment of a writing system and the introduction of Semitic speech, both of which the Ethiopians modified considerably. South Arabian culture, a foreign commodity from which the Ethiopians were able to freely pick and choose when they saw fit, rather than an entire civilization imposed by foreign rulers. The Ge'ez language is no longer universally thought of, as previously assumed, to be an offshoot of Sabaean or Old South Arabian, and there is some linguistic evidence of Semitic languages being spoken in Eritrea and Ethiopia since approximately 2000 BC. However, the Ge'ez script later replaced epigraphic South Arabian in the Kingdom of Aksum. Empire. The Kingdom of Aksum was a trading empire centered in Eritrea and northern Ethiopia. It existed approximately 100 to 940 AD, growing from the Iron Age Proto-Aksumite period c. 4th century BC to achieve prominence by the 1st century AD. According to the Book of Aksum, Aksum's first capital, Mazabur, was built by Eteopes, son of Cush. The capital was later moved to Aksum in northern Ethiopia. The kingdom used the name Ethiopia as early as the 4th century. The empire of Aksum at times extended across most of present-day Eritrea, northern Ethiopia, western Yemen, southern Saudi Arabia and parts of eastern Sudan. The capital city of the empire was Aksum, now in northern Ethiopia. Today a smaller community, the city of Aksum was once a bustling metropolis, cultural and economic center. 2 hills and 2 streams lie on the east and west expanses of the city, perhaps providing the initial impetus for settling this area. Along the hills and plain outside the city, the Aksumites had cemeteries with elaborate gravestones called stelae or obelisks. Other important cities included Yeha, Halpi Melazo, Matara, Adulis, and Kohido, the last 3 of which are now in Eritrea. By the reign of Indubis in the late 3rd century, it had begun minting its own currency and was named by Mani as one of the 4 great powers of his time along with the Sasanian Empire, Roman Empire, and 3 kingdoms China. The Aksumites adopted Christianity as its state religion in 325 or 328 AD under King Ezana, and Aksum was the first state ever to use the image of the cross on its coins. Around the 3rd century, the Aksumites led by Sembrouts were victorious over the Sasia, with Sasia becoming a tributary of the kingdom of Aksum. Around 330, Ezana of Aksum led his army into the kingdom of Meroe, conquering and sacking the town itself. A large stone monument was left there, and the conquest is also related on Ezana stone. King Caleb. Around 525, King Caleb sent an expedition to Yemen against the Jewish Himyarite king Dunuwas, who was persecuting the Christian community there. For nearly half a century South Arabia would become an Ethiopian protectorate under Abraha and his son Masruk. Dunuwas was deposed and killed and Caleb appointed a Christian Himyarite, Esimitheos, as his viceroy. However, around 530 this viceroy was deposed by the Aksumite general Abraha with support of Ethiopians who had settled in Yemen. Caleb sent 2 expeditions against Abraha, but both were decisively defeated. Caleb did not pursue the matter further, and recognized Abraha as his new viceroy. After Abraha's death, His son Masruq Abraha continued the Aksumite viceroyalty in Yemen, resuming payment of tribute to Aksum. However, his half-brother Ma'd-Karib revolted. After being denied by Justinian, Ma'd-Karib sought help from Khosrau I, the Sassanid Persian emperor, thus triggering the Aksumite-Persian Wars. Khosrau sent a small fleet and army under Commander Varez to depose the current king of Yemen. The war culminated with the siege of Sana'a, capital of Aksumite Yemen. After its fall in 570, and Masruq's death, Ma'd-Karib's son, Saif, was put on the throne. In 575, the war resumed again, after Saif was killed by Aksumites. The Persian general Varez led another army of 8,000, ending Aksum rule in Yemen and becoming hereditary governor of Yemen. According to Monroe Hay, these wars may have been Aksum's swan song as a great power, with an overall weakening of Aksumite authority and overexpenditure in money and manpower. According to Ethiopian traditions, Caleb eventually abdicated and retired to a monastery. It is also possible that Ethiopia was affected by the plague of Justinian around this time. Aksum, though weakened, remained a strong empire and trading power until the rise of Islam in the 7th century. However, unlike the relations between the Islamic powers and Christian Europe, Aksum was on good terms with its Islamic neighbors and provided shelter to Muhammad's early followers around 615. Nevertheless, as early as 640, Umar sent a naval expedition against Adulis, the expedition of Alqamah bin Mujazziz, but it was eventually defeated. In the 7th century, early Muslims from Mecca sought refuge from Quraysh persecution by traveling to the kingdom, a journey known in Islamic history as the First Hijrah. However, the religion did not establish until the arrival of the Ottomans in the 15th century. Aksumite naval power also declined throughout the period, though in 702 Aksumite pirates were able to invade the Hejaz and occupy Jeddah. In retaliation, however, Sulayman ibn Abd al-Malik was able to take the occupied parts back in the Dahlak archipelago from Aksum, which became Muslim from that point on. Decline. After a second golden age in the early 6th century, the empire began to decline in the mid-6th century, eventually ceasing its production of coins in the early 7th century. Around this same time, the Aksumite population was forced to go farther inland to the highlands for protection, abandoning Aksum as the capital. Arab writers of the time continued to describe Ethiopia as an extensive and powerful state, though they had lost control of most of the coast and their tributaries. While land was lost in the north, it was gained in the south, and, though Ethiopia was no longer an economic power, it still attracted Arab merchants. The capital was moved to a new location, currently unknown, though it may have been called Kubar or Jarmi. Eventually, the Rashidun Caliphate took control of the Red Sea in Egypt by 646, pushing Aksum into economic isolation. Northwest of Aksum, in modern-day Sudan, the Christian states of Nobatia, Makuria and Alodia lasted till the 13th century before being overrun by Bedouin tribes and Bunj Sultanate. Aksum, isolated, nonetheless still remained Christian. Under the reign of Degnajan, during the 10th century, the empire kept expanding south, and sent troops into the modern-day region of Kaffa, while at the same time undertaking missionary activity into Ongo and Amhara. Local history holds that, around 960, a Jewish queen named Yodit or Gudit defeated the empire and burned its churches and literature. While there is evidence of churches being burned and an invasion around this time, her existence has been questioned by some Western authors. Another possibility is that the Aksumite power was ended by a southern pagan queen named Bani al-Hamwiya, possibly of the tribe al-Damata or Damoti. It is clear from contemporary sources that a female usurper did indeed rule the country at this time, and that her reign ended sometime before 1003. After a short dark age, the Aksumite Empire was succeeded by the Aga Zagwe dynasty in the 11th or 12th century, although limited in size and scope. However, Yakuno Amlak, who killed the last Zagwe king and founded the modern Solomonic dynasty around 1270, traced his ancestry and his right to rule from the last emperor of Aksum, Dilnayad. It should be mentioned that the end of the Aksumite Empire didn't mean the end of Aksumite culture and traditions. For example, the architecture of the Zagwe dynasty at Lalibela and Yemrana Krestos church shows heavy Aksumite influence. Climate change hypothesis. Climatic change and trade isolation have also been claimed as large reasons for the decline of the culture. The local subsistence base was substantially augmented by a climatic shift during the 1st century AD that reinforced the spring rains, extended the rainy season from 3.5 to 6 or 7 months, vastly improved the surface and subsurface water supply, doubled the length of the growing season, and created an environment comparable to that of modern central Ethiopia. This appears to explain how one of the marginal agricultural environments of Ethiopia was able to support the demographic base that made this far-flung commercial empire possible. It may also explain why no Aksumite rural settlement expansion into the moister, more fertile, and naturally productive lands of Begemder or Lasta can be verified during the heyday of Aksumite power. As international profits from the exchange network declined, Aksum lost its ability to control its own raw material sources and that network collapsed. The already persistent environmental pressure of a large population to maintain a high level of regional food production had to be intensified. The result was a wave of soil erosion that began on a local scale circa 650 and attained catastrophic proportions after 700. Presumably complex socio-economic inputs compounded the problem. These are traditionally reflected in declining maintenance, deterioration and partial abandonment of marginal crop land, shifts to destructive pastoral exploitation, and eventual, wholesale and irreversible land degradation. This syndrome was possibly accelerated by an apparent decline in rainfall reliability beginning 730 to 760, with the presumed result that an abbreviated modern growing season was re-established during the 9th century.